for after the hour, just letting folks fill in. If you're feeling chatty today and you just wanted to post in the chat where you're calling in from, I always like to see that information. I am joined today, our SmartBear logo up there is my coworker Andrew, who is our principal marketing manager for Collaborator. And we are sitting in our beautiful sunny office here in Somerville, Massachusetts. Finally getting some nice weather here. It's going to be warm today, but at least we're not cloudy and rainy like we have been for, I think, for the past 10 days. Looks like we got some folks from Cambridge, Massachusetts, Jersey City, New Jersey. Thanks for sharing. Cincinnati, Ohio. And Phoenix, Arizona, but it's hot out there, isn't it? Yep, hot Phoenix. Thanks, David. Portland, Oregon, you guys have been suffering with the heat as well, too. Feel sorry for you guys up there and having HVAC systems that aren't quite set up for that type of weather. Michael in Fort Collins. Before I moved out here, I lived in Denver. Miss Colorado so much. And the Netherlands. Excellent. We're going to give it just about one more minute, and then we're going to go ahead and kick things off. If somebody would be so kind as just to post in the chat whether or not you can see my screen, we'll just make sure that's good to go before we start our presentation today. All right. Thanks, Russell. All right, we are at 3 after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. So hopefully everyone that's on the call today is here for our Collaborator webinar, our first session of our summer school here with Collaborator. We're going to talk about Fortify with new features and functionality. We have an amazing development team here at SmartBear working on the Collaborator product that go really above and beyond with all the work that they do, and we really appreciate it. We're going to be looking today at several different new features that are available on Collaborator. We'll be talking through some of those, showing you how they look in the interface as well. So today is focused primarily on new features and functionality. We are going to go all the way back to 13.3 today. I know we've kind of done a new features, but this is for folks on the phone that haven't seen 13.3 and beyond. Or I need Andrew to keep me honest. We're actually going back to 13.4, not as far back as 13.3. So without further ado, let's get started. So a couple of housekeeping items to begin with. Today's session is being recorded. So the playback links will be made available after the webinar today. If you do have questions, please post those to the Q&A channel. I know the chat channel is very, very common to post questions in, but please use the Q&A for those specific questions. And then we'll have an additional Q&A session at the end, time permitting. We do have a lot of stuff to cover today, so I expect that we're going to take probably up close to the full hour. So I mentioned my name is Mel Gage. I saw Russ respond there, and I know many of you have been on calls with me before. I am the solutions engineer here at SmartBear, supporting the sales team with the Collaborator suite. And joining me today is Andrew Murata, who is our product marketing specialist for Collaborator. He wears other hats as well with other products, so we appreciate all the time and effort he puts into putting these events together. So he's primarily responsible for our session here today. Today we'll just kick things off, a brief overview on SmartBear for those on the phone that aren't familiar with SmartBear. I know that many of you are, but SmartBear is your one-stop shop for your testing and performance and review capabilities, as we'll see in just a moment. We were founded in 2009, and actually Collaborator is the very first product that SmartBear launched. We are a global organization with offices in places such as Galway, Ireland, and even Australia. And as we continue to acquire new partners, our latest being Bugsnag out in California, we're adding yet more offices and more functional capabilities to the Collaborator product, or pardon me, to the SmartBear product suite. We've got over 16 million users, 24,000 customers, and we still support our open source initiatives with things like Swagger and some other products as well. And we do continue to grow at a surprising clip, even through these tough times that we've been experiencing with COVID. Our tools help you accelerate your development quality across your software development lifecycle. So if you are looking for those API lifecycle management, test management, and behavior-driven design tools, as we're going to be looking at today, code review and monitoring as well, with functional and load testing all rolled into products from one location. And as I talk to customers on my calls, we really see how important it is to be able to provide comprehensive suites for the entire SDLC from one company. They don't want to go looking, hither and yon for the tools that they need when SmartBear provides those for you in one location. Our suite runs from the design through the test and the monitor phase. So with Cucumber Studio doing design, and again, Swagger Hub is our version of that open source initiative that we still support with Swagger. Through testing with Test Complete and Load Ninja being some of our newer products, as well as with Ready API to create, manage, and execute your automated tests for APIs. And then what we're going to see today down at the bottom, Collaborator for code, document, and artifact review. So our agenda for the Collaborator session today, we're going to take a brief look at the Collaborator infrastructure. And then we're going to talk about updates to Collaborator and kind of our release cadence. We're going to go through those new items in a list format, so you have a quick access to those in the recording. And then we're going to do that new features demonstration with a Q&A. And then we've got our upcoming event, the Summer School Session 2. We'll show you the information so you can mark the date on your calendar for that as well. So Collaborator infrastructure. Collaborator is a peer review tool. It's designed for code, document, and as we're going to see in a moment, Simulink models as well now. Collaborator is a server solution, so it installs on-prem on your hardware or in your cloud services. So this is a solution that you own in your infrastructure. And then with Collaborator, we have options for manual review where we can bring artifacts into the server through the web UI and then perform those reviews on those artifacts. In addition, we also have our enterprise client GUI. Now, this is a small application that typically installs on the user's workstation. It's also the source of our command line integration. So if you are running scripts and doing some additional work with Collaborator through the command line, this piece would also be installed on your server. And that's what I'm using when I'm doing a lot of my development work around triggers and additional scripting. Now, the enterprise client GUI ties into many of the more legacy systems that we integrate with. So Git and Subversion tie in through that client GUI, Perforce, PTC integrity, and we do continue to evaluate how our changes in Collaborator and changes in those systems affect the review process within Collaborator. As an example, with PTC integrity, we support up to version 11. They have launched their rebranded integrity actually to Windchill now, which is their version 12. And so we're still in the process of validating our application with version 12, but we don't foresee any issues with that. So there's our more legacy types of integrations. Now our newer focus and the actual focus of our next session is going to be the webhooks integrations with the newer Git repositories such as GitLab, GitHub, Azure DevOps, and Bitbucket. Azure DevOps is our latest integration for repository systems, which rolled out in December of 2019. And we do continue to refine and improve these integrations as new features and functionality are added to those particular repo systems, as we'll see in a moment. We also tie into Jira for issue tracking using that same webhooks type of integration. One of our changes that we're going to be looking at today, and I'm going to caveat some things when we get there, is new functionality that lets you use your Atlassian login credentials to also log in and manage your reviews in Collaborator. We'll see that from, I believe it's GitHub as well. Yep, GitHub will also give you login options now. With version 13.6, we added Simulink. So Simulink models can now be brought into Collaborator if they're exported out of Simulink using the report generator toolbox into a WebZip package. We can manually upload those into Collaborator 13.6 for review capabilities and functionalities, just as we have with other documents. We also support integration directly into MATLAB with Collaborator's plugin. And that plugin will give you options to create reviews right out of Simulink, and also to update reviews, just as you see with the client GUI sometimes, right out of that application, bringing in new changes to your models and everything right into your open reviews. And as we're going to see, well, as I'll talk about in a moment, we also have some improvements to that Simulink that just came out in version 13.7 that we launched last Friday, where you can map to your MATLAB executable and actually use your Git repository systems now as your source control for your Simulink models. That when you create a pull request, we can identify those Simulink models. As they come into Collaborator, that MATLAB executable will create those zip packages for you in the server for review. Beyond our out-of-the-box integrations, we also support that command line that I've already mentioned, as well as the JSON API that gives you much of the functionality out of the server. So if you're looking to integrate with some applications that we don't currently do so out of the box, you have options to look into those. And then finally, I have a set of server-side triggers that allow you to create scripts that trigger on certain events within the review workflow to do additional things. As an example, I've done some scripting examples for a couple folks, and they may even be on our call today, where they want to archive their reviews when they're completed. So I created a simple script that uses the command line. When the completed trigger goes off or a phase change trigger goes off in the server, it checks the state of that review, and if it's completed, uses the command line to automatically create that archive zip package and then drop it off in their long-term storage. And this is great for those organizations that need that history, that audit trail for their review process. When their auditors come in, they can simply hand them the review zip package, and it includes all of the information associated with that review, including every copy of the artifacts that were actually brought into that review. So triggers can be an extremely powerful tool. So we're going to take a look at the review workflow. But first, Andrew, I think we should probably kick off our first poll question today. So are you a current Collaborator user? And we'll just give that a few minutes just to populate through. We're going to have a couple more polls today as well. So I'm going to go ahead and move that out of the way while folks answer that. And we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the Collaborator review workflow. So the Collaborator review workflow is coded in the server. And I know folks have asked, well, what can we do to adjust that? There are a lot of ways that you can put in gates in the workflow to kind of manage what's going on with that particular workflow. But we're going to take a look at that basic process. So the basic review process in Collaborator starts with your author making changes to code or document files or Simulink artifacts, and then uploading those into the server, whether it's manually or through that enterprise client GUI or through one of the other options we have, such as that Simulink plugin or the webhooks integrations. Once they upload them to the server and create their review, they'll add participants to that review. And Collaborator supports 4 roles in our workflow process. So you can adjust those roles, assign those roles as you need to, but then those participants are added to the review. Any requirements that are implemented by the template may also need to be added and then, or responded to, and then we move to the inspection phase. Our reviewers at that time will get notification via email that there are reviews ready. They'll take a look at artifacts, make comments, and identify and mark up any defects. Once they have done so, they send the review back to the rework phase, where the author then takes those items, those comments, those defects, and makes changes based on them. They'll then upload those new versions of the documents to the review in question, and then send it back to the reviewers to evaluate those changes. If the reviewers see additional items that may need resolution, they can mark those up and simply send it back to rework for the author to make those changes, continuing that cycle until everything has been resolved within that particular review. Once that's resolved, the review moves to completion. Now, depending on the type of integration that you're using, Collaborator can also trigger things like code merges. You can also use scripting. I've been working with one organization this past week where they're using a specific tool, but they want to make sure that the review has actually been signed off. And we've been talking about using a custom field for that. And if the presence of that custom field is the correct answer, they're using that trigger script to actually merge their code in one of those legacy applications. So let's talk, well, before we move on, Andrew, how does our poll question look? Are things looking pretty good on the poll question?
Yeah, poll 1 looks good. We can launch the second one whenever you want.
Yeah, so let's do that. Let's go ahead and launch that second poll, and we're going to ask, what are you currently reviewing in Collaborator? And this is a multiple choice, so if you're doing any of those particular items, then please feel free to mark those off. I got a question coming in from Russ. I didn't mention the annotation phase, and often users start their reviews in the annotation phase. Can we override that phase? So with the annotation phase, you're right, Russ, that is an optional phase. It's used for things like assigning groups. You can move to the annotation phase also maybe to review requirements or requirements documents before moving actually to the inspection phase. And there are options in the server, depending on your template capabilities, your template requirements, you can move reviews directly into the inspection phase. Most organizations do skip that annotation phase, but there's not currently a way to bypass the annotation phase. There is an option we may look at, though, that might answer that question for you. And then from Michael, are there examples of showing pre-merge test results for code that is being reviewed? Let's see, Michael, if I've got you, let me see. I don't know if I have an option to unmute you. I was going to ask if you could just clarify what you're asking for that. Andrew, can you unmute Michael for me, please?
All right, Michael, you should be good to talk now.
Okay, yeah. So as part of the code review process, one of the requirements for our developers is that there's a small set of pre-merge tests that have to be passed by the code.
Okay.
And currently in the GitHub review, that shows up as, yep, this has passed those initial smoke tests. So we don't want people, in this particular pipeline, putting code up for review that hasn't at least passed those initial tests.
So there's ways that you could do that. I'd have to investigate a little bit on the GitHub side, using the API to, for example, I've done some work with some organizations in the past with some custom scripts that when a review is created, you can query those particular items and validate it that those checks have passed, and then note that in those custom fields in the review. And if those aren't the correct answers, then it could pause that review or not allow merges to go through. I'd have to do a little bit of research on how we could pull that information out of GitHub for you. But there are options that you can use, in fact, to validate with the command line or through the API that certain things have been done, and simply fill in custom fields with the proper response if the response from the request is accurate.
Great, thanks.
Sure, thanks for the question. So let's take a look now at some of the updates that we've gone through. And like I said, we're looking at a Collaborator release cadence, right? Such explosive growth in the development arena that we've been keeping pace with that. So we saw version 12 in 2019, and then we see version 13 in June of last year. So, we're looking at right around 1 year that version 12 was out before we moved to that next major release in version 13. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today is in version 13.7. You'll see that on the far right side of my chart that we released last Friday. And I'm going to be honest, some of these new features are new to me. I got my demo server upgraded yesterday, so we may be experiencing some of these newly together today. So looking at some of the improvements, Collaborator 14, we're only going back to that point. Just going to take a quick segue here to answer Stefan's question. Are examples of the trigger scripts I'm talking about available for the user community? There are some examples of the trigger scripts in the documentation. I am going to show you that documentation link, and we can actually post that in the chat for those that want it. Our support page is very good and has links to the communities. There are example scripts in the documentation, and haven't been heavily involved in the scripting, but I've been doing a lot of work on that, and I know there are questions around scripting. I do have it on my future to-do list to put some examples up in the community as well, so that people can see some of the things that I've been working on with some of the scripts that I've done. So great question. There are examples in the documentation. There are examples of some scripts in the community. So I think they can give you a good stepping off point for the triggers. So for Collaborator 13.4, one of our big ones was app mentions, and we're actually going to see an improvement to app mentions in version 13.7. Auto polling for new repositories, which for me was one of the biggest improvements that we've done in quite some time. In-app notifications, that ties in with the app mentions. Version info in the comments and defects, so you know what you're actually commenting defect, which version of the file we're commenting and our defects on. Support for GitHub teams and the pull requests, along with code owners. We can the focus view for the diff viewer, and restriction of moving push pins. Now I know we're showing some of the major improvements here. There are usually a lot more bug fixes and additional patches, as I'll show you in a moment, that go along with these updates as well. Version 13.5. Added our singular upload option, so we can upload different file names for the same document. They do have to be the same document extension, but now you can at a singular level upload files with different names. So if you're using versioning information in your file names, you can now bring those in for diffs. Supporting mark all read at the review materials level. That's just an ease of use type function. It does have to be enabled at the server level. Support merge request pipelines for GitLab, SAML SSO membership syncs improvements, and then just some other backend stuff with the server itself. So version 13.6, I'm trying to remember when this one came out, but this is our big Simulink release. So we can now do Simulink model reviews, and I want to thank everyone on the phone today that took part in our beta program on the Simulink model reviews. Your feedback has been invaluable in our development process. And when we start to look at some of the things in 13.7, I think you're going to be impressed with the work that has gone on with the Simulink integration. We rolled out the Simulink review app as well. That's what allows you to bring those models directly in from Simulink. Cross-page scrolling in document reviews. For me, that was a huge one. We're now no longer going page to page. You can simply scroll seamlessly through a document as you're used to in the applications where you develop those documents today. Caching for document reviews, just to allow them to open more quickly. History of file renames. Some issues with macOS Big Sur. So that was another huge upgrade with version 13.6. And database performance improvements. Now, we've seen a lot of work done recently by the development team around database access and how often collaborators reaching out to the database. And I actually saw one of our sprint demos on Tuesday this week, talking about the number of database calls for certain actions. And we've really streamlined that. So you're going to see a lot less communication between Collaborator and the database, making that review process much more efficient and really toning down the network chatter between Collaborator and your associated SQL database. So version 13.7, like I said, launched just last Friday. We have added functionality to log in using your GitHub or your Atlassian accounts. And as I mentioned, some of this, I haven't even gotten set up yet. They upgraded my server yesterday. So we're going to look at this in the documentation. We're going to provide you the link to our support page for Collaborator so you can go find this information very easily. The at mentioning, we now added some color coding so you can quickly look at the chat pane where the mentions are, and you're going to see color highlighting for the user account that is logged in. So you can quickly see which of your mentions are intended for your use. Delete latest upload revisions for manually uploaded files. You can now delete those if there are no comments or defects marked against those files. Once they have been commented on or something's been marked as a defect, that file is pinned to that review and will remain on the review. But prior to that point, you can delete those files. Upload files by folder. So if you are working on a particular folder, much like we see in repository systems, you can now select that folder and pull in the entire tree structure of that folder in the manual upload option. We can also set default template for pull request reviews. I know this has been a huge question that I've dealt with many customers coming out of, say, GitLab or GitHub. They're saying, well, you know, this is a particular project. I want to make sure a particular template is used because this group for this project always uses this template. How can we set that as a default? That's now an option for your repository settings. So you can go in and adjust that and specify a template for each of your repos. So you're getting that template for the teams that need to use it. We can also control reopening of reviews on the template level, whether or not if a review is closed and somebody drops in a new comment, does that reopen the review and require that process to go through? And then this last one is a big one I know for a couple of users that I've talked to, not sure if they're on the phone, but allow non-participants to modify completed reviews. This comes about because some organizations have years of history in their reviews, and they're trying to clean up their previous reviews, maybe with new organizational structures, so that if they're going to look back on those reviews and say, you know, how did this group in? Can we go in and change that? So now we've got this option to allow particular users to go back and modify completed reviews. So you can go in and make those updates. So with that, we're going to take a look at some of these new features directly in the server itself. And I think this is probably a good time, Andrew, if we want to kick off our third and final poll for today. If you are a Collaborator user, or if you're not, let us know. And let us know what version of the server you're using. Thanks, Andrew, for posting those links in the chat for us. And while we're waiting on that, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and open up my web browser here. So you can always reach our support page. Let me go ahead and move this out of the way. You can always reach our support page at support.smartbear.com. So this applies to any of our products. And you can simply select Collaborator. This is also a good place where you can open a case. So if you are looking for support or you've got an issue with Collaborator, you can open up your cases right here at support.smartbear.com. The one that I like to bookmark, if we come into Collaborator, is this page, because now we're looking at support specifically for Collaborator. You're going to see a new layout for our support site if you haven't visited in some time. We've got a link here that allows you to add feature requests. So rather than opening cases, if it is something that is imperative for your workflow, you can still open a case for that new feature, but we also have the option here for feature requests. We're also going to see that you can open a case from the support page here for Collaborator as well. But we've got access to videos, and I've created a few videos, but we have some older videos available as well. Downloads for the server and client applications, as well as for our plugins. And then the documentation page, which is also available here. Now the documentation page takes you to what's in the documentation, and what's new is always available on this page. So if we take a look, and I'm going to talk here about the GitHub and Atlassian accounts because I don't have this currently set up for demonstration. But if you set up this integration for logging in using your GitHub account, you can specify the remote accounts tab to use those preferences. And if you're logging in with your Atlassian account, your email address in your user preferences is what coincides with your Atlassian account profile. So you'll see those options if you've got those set up for signing in with GitHub or logging in with Atlassian accounts. And there are instructions on how to go ahead and set that up. You can also see on this page our review history and update history, so you can go back and look at when things were updated. You'll see there's things here that we didn't even touch on, supporting encoding for file names, poking participants, those additional updates to the Simulink model reviews. Now I've mentioned these, and where we're able to create reviews for Simulink models from remote repositories now. So there's some instructions, and we'll see this in the interface as well, on how to set up and map to your MATLAB executable so that when those pull requests go off and it identifies Simulink models, it'll create the packages we need for the diff viewer. You're going to see that we've got a lot of additional security improvements as well, performance, and a whole host of bug fixes. So, if you are a Collaborator user staying up to date with your server, you can always find the information on what those new updates entail right here on our support page. Another one I wanted to point out, and let's see, I always forget where they put this one on, but you can also sign up for notifications now. And maybe that's back on our support for Collaborator, where we can sign up for notifications such that when new versions of the server come out, you automatically get notified on that. I'd have to find that. They kind of hide it, which kind of surprised me a little bit. So let's go ahead and take a look at how some of this stuff looks in Collaborator. So I'm going to log in. I'm not going to go through our entire review workflow today unless there's just specific requests for that. Log in. All right, let's try that again. There we go. All right, so many of you are familiar with Collaborator, and if you're not, this is the basic home screen. Some of the newer options that we've done in the home screen that I didn't touch on in my list, you can now add review custom fields to your home screen to sort information as it applies for your needs. You simply use that little cog here, and you can specify any of the additional review custom fields to add as headers in your screen. Just a minute, Samir, I'll get to that question in just a moment. So this setup is also user specific. So if you're making changes, don't worry about it affecting other users as well. Now, one of the new features that we talked about on our list was our app mentions and our notifications bell. So we'll see that up here in the upper right. This was available on, when I say version 13.4. So if you are on 13.3 or older, this would be a new bell when you upgrade. And this shows you your current notifications, the subject of that notification, as well as the review associated with that notification. We can mark these as read. We can delete and manage these as possible. So I'm going to take just a moment and answer Samir's question. Would I be able to point to some kind of compatibility matrix for Collaborator with MySQL and IBM RTC? You're unfortunately stuck on 11.5 and looking to upgrade in the near future. Absolutely. So if we're looking for those integrations with general information and Collaborator additions, you can see what we support as far as those database backends. And when we're talking about setting up the server and the installation, we can look at the database installation that specifies what versions of those servers that we support. And if we're talking about IBM RTC, you can find that information under source control integrations. So for example, here's our RTC integration, and it talks about in the overview for this section, what versions we support for Collaborator and those versions of RTC that we support. So all that is available in the documentation. Now, one thing I didn't mention, our support page is very good to search for those terms. So if you need help finding those particular items, you can search on there. I'm not sure why I've got creepy on there, but that's in my search history for some reason. But yeah, you can go find that information in the web page. So I hope that helps for you, Samir. And then Danny, what are options to address errors in previously completed reviews where a correction is needed, i.e. incorrect resolution, artifact reference, comment becomes obsoleted, etc. So you can reopen reviews, reopen closed reviews. So I'm looking at some of my closed reviews here. I do have option as an administrator to reopen reviews. And then we also just talked about that allowing non-participants to modify completed reviews. So, and I'll be honest, this isn't something I have tested out yet for a non-administrator role, but that is a setting in one of our new features under users. So under users, and we can take a look at this, we'll see that here my user Erin is a group administrator, but that's the only permission she's got. And if I want to edit her permissions, I now will see the option here, can I modify completed reviews? So if we set this to yes, she should have options to go in and modify reviews that have been completed without reopening them. But again, my server was updated yesterday. I haven't had a chance to actually test this. So it may be something that we want to look at together. So good question. So let's look at some of the additional options that we've added in. One of the new ones that I really liked under the repository hosting services, we talked about auto polling and ignored repositories. This becomes extremely useful to set up the communications to your organizations. And you'll see here I've mapped, looks like I've mapped all of mine. So my GitLab, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps, and my GitHub repositories. So I've mapped those using my application token, or if you're on-prem, this is likely your password. And I have options now to automatically go out and check these organizations for new repos and bring them into Collaborator if I want to. I can specify how often I do that. But even with this turned off for auto polling, which I currently am, if I know that I'm adding new repos or new projects, I can simply have these mapped and run this at any given time that I want to. So for example, in my GitLab, if I run this request, it's going to go out and poll my GitLab server. And I'm going to go ahead and I've already grabbed on my screen. So you see my private token there. Hopefully you won't steal my stuff, but it's all demo stuff anyway. But we'll see all of my additional repos here that I could bring in that have not been currently mapped into Collaborator. And I can simply select those using a multi-select and create for selected. So now I don't have to go back in and rebuild my repo structure every time I add something new. I can simply go pull that organizational structure and grab the repos that I need. So this becomes extremely easy to add new projects and repos to your Collaborator server. Now, the other one that we had mentioned on version 13.7, you'll also see this new option here for MATLAB Simulink. So this is where we point to our local MATLAB executable. So when we create those pull requests that have MATLAB files in them, those Simulink models, it can create that review package for us. So you would drop your MATLAB executable in here. Little embarrassed to admit that I'm still waiting on my MATLAB license. I did a lot of my demonstrations earlier on a trial license that has since expired. We are currently negotiating with MATLAB for the purchase of our own license. It unfortunately didn't drop before our demonstration today, but we're going to show you what MATLAB differences looks like in the server itself here in just a moment. You'll also see that additional login options here with version 13.7. My additional logins is where we set up those configurations for Atlassian and GitHub for those particular users, where we drop in our IDs in the resources we want to bring in and enable whether or not we want to enable sign in with Atlassian OAuth. So this is what by checking this enable option here, this is where we get that additional login choice on our login screen. And you'd see the same thing if we're going to use my GitHub OAuth for that same type of integration. So this is where you would specify those for your users. There's a couple other items I wanted to talk about with our new functionalities. So let's create a review and take a look at some of those additional options. I'm just going to go to my home screen, and I'm going to do my manual option here for a new review. I'm going to give it a review title. We'll just call this a demo review. And we can assign our groups and teams and templates as we're used to. Now, one thing that I haven't touched on yet, we added functionality to assign your templates from the pull request repository itself. So let me step back just a moment and we'll take a look at one of my repo hosting services. Let's just say my GitLab, my SmartBear demo that I normally work from. If I edit this, we're going to see this new option now here to specify a default review template. And you're going to notice that if this is set, it overrides group review template settings, which means if I have a group assigned and I use my pull request to assign this template, it's going to override that group setting for a specific template because this is going to take precedence for that particular setting. So I can specify which particular template I want to always be used when I create a review from this particular repo on my GitLab organization. And you can specify these individually. So again, you can make specific project templates for your project repos and make sure that we have those available when we create our pull request reviews. So I got a question from Patricia Scott. Thanks for joining us today, Pat. It's good to see you again. Can you auto add repos for a specific Bitbucket project, or do you have to search through the results to find them and to add them? So it is going to be at the organizational level. So for example, let's take a look at my Bitbucket option. So if I come into my Bitbucket, I'm at my organizational level, and this may be what you're referring to as projects, or you creating projects beyond this. So my next level would say be my project. So this is my organizational level, and you're right. If I'm looking at my repositories, my projects, so this is where you're talking about creating projects. Not sure why I'm not seeing my other projects here. Oh, because it took me to my Bitbucket home. Let's go Bitbucket, and I'm going to log in. And so this is taking me to my Jira for my projects for my Jira. So are you mapping these at this level, or are we talking about repository level? Pat, if you wanted to just type in a response there. But here we can see I've got, looks like 6 repos set up at my organizational level. So in my Collaborator server, if I'm polling this particular organization, it's going to show me those that I haven't mapped in. In this case, I only have the one. My onboarding project has not been brought in. So if we look at my repository hosting services, we should see quite a few of Bitbucket ones here. So there's my SB demo, and it looks like my other 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all already mapped in. So it's going to show you those that haven't been mapped, and you would have to search through those results and add them if we're looking at that organizational level. Hope that answers that question for you sufficiently. So we touched briefly on, and I think we'll see that in any of our repository systems. For example, if I want to look at my Bitbucket, I think we can also specify a default review template for any of my incoming repo systems. All right, so you have many Bitbucket projects, and those projects can have one to many repos in it. Okay, your Bitbucket server has a lot of projects within it. Yeah, so projects, I may you've got my email. Once you send me that question, and we can reach out after the webinar or sometime in the future. I have to admit my schedule today is completely packed. We are ending on time today because I do have a call right at the top of the hour in 15 minutes. So let's take a look at some of those additional items in our review. So we talked about the at mentions. Let's go ahead and add that in. I'm going to just put myself on here as the author. I'm going to add my reviewer in Ella. We'll also see now, one of the questions that came up earlier was about skipping the annotation phase. If your template has requirements, such as here, I put in a custom field, a review custom field, where I'm asking my authors to specify my project before we move forward to the inspection phase. So if you have items such as this one, you couldn't automatically move to the inspection phase, even if you have set your server to do so. Any items that are automatically filled in to meet template requirements, even to the point of adding authors, reviewers, observers, and moderators, or other roles as you define them, if those items are not filled in to meet the template requirements, you can't move forward to the planning annotation or the annotation or inspection phase. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. So now you'll notice we've met that requirement, and I can move to the inspection phase. And you'll notice I've got an option here. This all required fields are set. I have set that phase. I'm not sure why that's not showing me an option for the annotation phase. Let's refresh that and see if it gets, okay, there, now it's giving it to me. There is a setting in the server itself, and it has to do with your review process here and about for pull request functions. Do you want to move pull request reviews straight to inspection? And this is where you have options that if those template requests are met through things like subscriptions or group pools or maybe direct assignments, then you can move those reviews from pull requests directly into that annotation or inspection phase, depending on how you're set up. So for example, if this particular template didn't have that requirement for a projects field and I only needed an author and reviewers, I could set up subscriptions, assign my reviewers, and it would move directly to that inspection phase. So that is one option for that request that came in earlier about skipping that. And I think that was your question, Russ. And again, you have my email as well. So if you want to talk about that in a little bit more in depth, we can certainly investigate that. So back in my review, we've set up my users, and we're just going to take a look at that at mentions function. I'm going to send Ella an at mention. Simply start typing at mention, and it will show me my list of users. And we can select from that list, or we can simply finish typing it out, and then we can leave that comment. So this is one of my new favorite features. If I add this, we're going to see that put that on the chat pane. If I tab over to Ella's screen, well, it's not going to show me anything in the moment. So let's go back. I need to move to inspection before she gets notified. But let's look at some of our other upload options for review materials now. With 13.6, you're going to see that Simulink archives option. Now, I will also add the comment that Simulink models do require their own license. There is a user-specific license for Simulink access, and if that particular user is not currently assigned a Simulink license in the Collaborator server, they'll see those artifacts attached in the review materials, but they won't be able to access those in the diff viewer or make comments or defects on those. But we have options to upload Simulink archives. I'm going to go ahead and upload a couple today, just so we can take a look at what Simulink items look like. So I'm going to upload that zip file. So this zip file is that web URL version, and it does need to be uploaded using that Simulink files option. And we're going to see here that it realizes that is a Simulink package. If I had selected that zip file from just the files option, Collaborator is going to treat that as a regular zip file. And when it tries to open it, you're going to see all that standard ASCII weird character stuff in the diff viewer. So you do have to tell Collaborator that you're uploading a Simulink archive if you're not using one of the other avenues, such as the plugin or the pull request option for Simulink files. We've added with 13.7 an option to pull in entire folder structures. So maybe you're managing all of your document artifacts in a given location. And for example, if I've got my version 1 of my files and I upload these, it's going to show all of my current files. And when we upload those, it's going to show that in a version tree structure. And if I had additional folders underneath this folder, it would have pulled those in this archive as well. So it's going to grab that entire tree structure and bring in all of those artifacts. Now, one thing I learned this morning, you notice we've got version 1 here. I thought, well, I'm just going to use a version 2 folder and diff against these same documents with changes already. But one thing I noticed is if you specify a separate folder, this Collaborator treats that as a separate tree and treats those as their own documents, as I'll demonstrate. So we select that file and upload those. So it's going to, even though I have all the same file names, because we also include this in the tree structure, it considers these as separate items within that, that tree structure. Now, some of the other changes that we've made recently, you'll notice these new icons out here next to my files where we can upload those different file names on that individual basis, as I mentioned. And we can also delete files, right? As long as, again, they have no comments or defects marked against them, we can clean this up and just get rid of some of these files that we don't necessarily want to review. So just be aware, if you are using the upload folder version, if you are uploading files to diff, changes need to be made within that folder structure before you re-upload it so that you are diffing file against file. Now I'm going to upload some different versions here manually. So for different file names, this is where I can come in and specify a file with a different file name. So here it's actually showing me, because this was a docx file, it's showing me only those docx documents because I have to maintain my file extension in order to diff files with different names. They still need the same extension. So I can simply select one of those and upload against that particular file. All right, so let's take a look at how some of this looks in the diff viewer. All right, so Danny, not sure if I saw a review type field as you went through this review creation here. Is there an option to put that in a review? Example, system software requirement review, design decision review, safety review. Yes, absolutely. The review custom field is perfect for that type of requirement. So in my review, I've called it projects here, and I've got a drop-down list that makes me specify which project that I want to use. Now, you can create these custom fields however you like. I can put all of those types in on my drop-down list and require that my author specify what type of review this is. You can, if you really want to get creative, you can get into scripting and triggers, and again, do a lot of this automatic setup because, and I know I've talked a lot about triggers today. Let's take a quick look at what we have for trigger options in the server. You'll notice that there's a review created trigger. So you can run this executable as soon as your review is created to go out and populate a bunch of this stuff automatically if you want to. As an example, I was using a review created option and did a simple script that the user selected an option when the review was created, and it would go in and populate some custom fields automatically for me. I worked with one organization that their review process included several different teams and several different iterations. So we went through and created a tier review process. And I don't think they actually implemented this, but we did do some work where they wanted all of the reviews linked together, but they wanted a new review created at each step in their process. So we created a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 and used triggers that when tier 1 review completed, it would automatically create the next one, assign particular teams based on the template, populate some fields, back populate some fields in the review that have just been completed so that all those links were maintained. So you do have options around triggers. And you can see here all the various events that kick off triggers. Good question. So I do want to look quickly at the diff viewer before our time runs out here today. So I'm going to go ahead and send this to inspection for Ella to take a look at, and we're going to see a couple of our new features as well. So here in Ella's screen, I'm going to refresh hers because she's on a private browser. It doesn't refresh quite as often. So we're going to see that she now has that review assigned to her. And we're also going to see that her notification bell has some unread notifications. Now, when I move that review to the inspection phase, that not only sends out an email with her login information or with a link to that review, it also sends her a second email with that @mention notification as well. So you do get that email traffic on these. So again, she can mark these as resolved. She can follow the link right from this @mention into the review and find all the information. Now, one of our new highlights in version 13.7 is, I'm going to go ahead and mark this red, is we're now highlighting those @mentions with this color code to show for the user that's logged in only their, or at least highlight their options, their @mentions. So let's look at a couple of things in our diff viewer. One of the new ones, we're looking at my review here. And we talked about that continuous scrolling option. So now instead of going page to page, we can simply continuously scroll through my review and look at it as we are used to in our, and you can see here, this is my template. So we're seeing all of our bright, shining, smiling faces as I hide and make other slides available for our discussions. Now, one thing I did want to point out here, Collaborator does its best to render with the fonts if their fonts aren't loaded. So on my server here, I don't have the Windows font for the particular font here. So Collaborator grabbed the closest one that it could find, which is why you're seeing things like on my top page here, up on page 1. Let's go to page 1. Where we're seeing a little bit of overlap here because it did choose my font. You can resolve this easily in Windows by simply installing the fonts for your documents on the server, and Collaborator can take advantage of those. So let's step back to my review. Again, we can upload files with different file names. We've already done that on this particular document, and we're going to see the diff viewer here. We have added the new focus mode that you can use to, focus mode, wrong button, that will highlight, that will hide your top bar and your side chat windows to give you a little bit more real estate. We can also lock our documents together, as most of you are aware. And with our push pin, when you drop in that comment, it's going to bring that chat window back so you can enter your comment or your defect and move on with your review. And finally, I know we are about out of time today. Show you our viewer here for Simulink models. We're actually rendering the web view, and we can highlight traces, look at individual items, and we've also added functionality with version 13.7 to look at underlying code blocks with individual items. I know that had come up in the past as well. And I know we are at the top of the hour, so I am going to step back to my presentation for just a moment. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If there are any other questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat. I'll take a minute or two to answer those. And I did want to highlight our session 2 coming up in August on the 12th at the same time that we broadcast today. So please join us and look for those invites. Thanks, everyone. And if there are no further questions, I'll wish you all a pleasant day.